Macmillan Audio presents The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, read by Julia Whalen. The old gods may be great, but they are neither kind nor merciful. They are fickle, unsteady as moonlight on water or shadows in a storm. If you insist on calling them, take heed. Be careful what you ask for. Be willing to pay the price. And no matter how desperate or dire, never pray to the gods that answer after dark. Estelle Magritte, 1642 to 1719. Villons-sur-Sarthe, France, July 29th, 1714. A girl is running for her life. The summer air burns at her back, but there are no torches, no angry mobs, only the distant lanterns of the wedding party, the reddish glow of the sun as it breaks against the horizon, cracks and spills across the hills, and the girl runs, skirts tangling in the grass as she surges toward the woods, trying to beat the dying light. Voices carry on the wind, calling her name. "Adeline! Adeline! Adeline!" Her shadow stretches out ahead, too long, its edges already blurring, and small white flowers tumble from her hair, littering the ground like stars, a constellation left in her wake, almost like the one across her cheeks. 7 freckles, one for every love she'd have, that's what Estelle had said when the girl was still young. One for every life she'd lead, one for every god watching over her. Now they mock her, those 7 marks, promises, lies. She's had no loves, she's lived no lives, she's met no gods, and now she is out of time. But the girl doesn't slow, doesn't look back. She doesn't want to see the life that stands there waiting, static as a drawing, solid as a tomb. Instead, she runs. Part 1. The Gods That Answer After Dark. Title of piece: Revenir. Artist: Arlo Muret. Date: 1721 to 22 A.D. Medium: ash wood marble. Location: on loan from the Musée d'Orsay. Description: a sculptural series of 5 wooden birds in various postures and stages of pre-flight, mounted on a narrow marble plinth. Background: a diligent autobiographer, Muret kept journals that provide insight into the artist's mind and process. Regarding the inspiration for Revenir, Muret attributed the idea to a figurine found on the streets of Paris in the winter of 1715. The wooden bird, found with a broken wing, is reputedly recreated as the 5th in the sequence, albeit intact, about to take flight. Estimated value: $175,000. New York City, March 10th, 2014. 1. The girl wakes up in someone else's bed. She lies there, perfectly still, tries to hold time like a breath in her chest, as if she can keep the clock from ticking forward, keep the boy beside her from waking, keep the memory of their night alive through sheer force of will. She knows, of course, that she can't, knows that he'll forget. They always do. It isn't his fault. It is never their faults. The boy is still asleep, and she watches the slow rise and fall of his shoulders, the place where his dark hair curls against the nape of his neck, the scar along his ribs. Details long memorized. His name is Toby. Last night, she told him hers was Jess. She lied, but only because she can't say her real name, one of the vicious little details tucked like nettles in the grass, hidden barbs designed to sting. What is a person, if not the marks they leave behind? She has learned to step between the thorny weeds, but there are some cuts that cannot be avoided. A memory, a photograph, a name. In the last month, she has been Claire, Zoe, Michelle, but 2 nights ago, when she was Elle and they were closing down a late-night cafe after one of his gigs, Toby said that he was in love with a girl named Jess. He simply hadn't met her yet. So now, she is Jess. Toby begins to stir, and she feels the old familiar ache in her chest as he stretches, rolls toward her, but doesn't wake, not yet. His face is now inches from her, his lips parted in sleep, black curls shadowing his eyes, dark lashes against fair cheeks. Once, the darkness teased the girl as they strolled along the Seine, told her that she had a type, insinuating that most of the men she chose, and even a few of the women, looked an awful lot like him. The same dark hair, the same sharp eyes, the same etched features. But that wasn't fair. After all, the darkness only looked the way he did because of her. She'd given him that shape, chosen what to make of him, what to see. "Don't you remember," she told him then, "when you were nothing but shadow and smoke?" "Darling," he'd said in his soft, rich way, "I was the night itself." Now it is morning in another city, another century, the bright sunlight cutting through the curtains, and Toby shifts again, rising up through the surface of sleep. And the girl who was Jess, holds her breath again as she tries to imagine a version of this day where he wakes and sees her and remembers, where he smiles and strokes her cheek and says, "Good morning." But it won't happen like that. And she doesn't want to see the familiar, vacant expression, doesn't want to watch as the boy tries to fill in the gaps where memories of her should be, witness as he pulls together his composure into practiced nonchalance. The girl has seen that performance often enough, knows the motions by heart, so instead she slides from the bed and pads barefoot out into the living room. She catches her reflection in the hall mirror and notices what everyone notices: the 7 freckles, scattered like a band of stars across her nose and cheeks, her own private constellation. She leans forward and fogs the glass with her breath, draws her fingertip through the cloud as she tries to write her name, A-D, but she only gets as far as that before the letters dissolve. It's not the medium. No matter how she tries to say her name, no matter how she tries to tell her story, and she has tried. In pencil, in ink, in paint, in blood. Adeline, Addie, LaRue. It is no use. The letters crumble or fade. The sounds die in her throat. Her fingers fall away from the glass and she turns, surveying the living room. Toby is a musician, and the signs of his art are everywhere. In the instruments that lean against the walls, in the scribbled lines and notes scattered on tables, bars of half-remembered melodies mixed in with grocery lists and weekly to-dos. But here and there, another hand. The flowers he's started keeping on the kitchen sill, though he can't remember when the habit started. The book on Rilke he doesn't remember buying. The things that last, even when memories don't. Toby is a slow riser, so Addie makes herself tea. He doesn't drink it, but it's already there, in his cupboard, a tin of loose Ceylon and a box of silk pouches. A relic of a late-night trip to the grocery store, a boy and a girl wandering the aisles, hand in hand, because they couldn't sleep. Because she hadn't been willing to let the night end, wasn't ready to let go. She lifts the mug, inhales the scent as memories waft up to meet it. A park in London, a patio in Prague, a tea room in Edinburgh. The past drawn like a silk sheet over the present. It's a cold morning in New York, the windows fogged with frost, so she pulls a blanket from the back of the couch and wraps it around her shoulders. A guitar case takes up one end of the sofa, and Toby's cat takes up the other, so she perches on the piano bench instead. The cat, also named Toby, so I can talk to myself without it being weird, he explained, looks at her as she blows on her tea. She wonders if the cat remembers. Her hands are warmer now, and she sets the mug on top of the piano and slides the cover up off the keys, stretches her fingers, and starts to play as softly as possible. In the bedroom, she can hear Toby the human stirring, and every inch of her, from skeleton to skin, tightens in dread. This is the hardest part. Addie could have left, should have left, slipped out when he was still asleep, when their morning was still an extension of their night, a moment trapped in amber. But it is too late now, so she closes her eyes and continues to play, keeps her head down as she hears his footsteps underneath the notes, keeps her fingers moving when she feels him in the doorway. He'll stand there, taking in the scene, trying to piece together the timeline of last night, how it could have gone astray, when he could have met a girl and then taken her home, if he could have had too much to drink, why he doesn't remember any of it. But she knows that Toby won't interrupt her as long as she's playing, so she savors the music for several more seconds before forcing herself to trail off, look up, pretend she doesn't notice the confusion on his face. "Morning," she says, her voice cheerful, and her accent, once country French, now so faint that she hardly hears it. Good morning," he says, running a hand through his loose black curls, and to his credit, Toby looks the way he always does, a little dazed and surprised to see a pretty girl sitting in his living room, wearing nothing but a pair of underwear and his favorite band t-shirt beneath the blanket. "Jess," she says, supplying the name he can't find because it isn't there. "It's okay," she says, "if you don't remember." Toby blushes and nudges Toby the cat out of the way as he sinks onto the couch cushions. "I'm sorry, this isn't like me. I'm not that kind of guy." She smiles. "I'm not that kind of girl." He smiles too, then, and it's a line of light breaking the shadows of his face. He nods at the piano, and she wants him to say something like, "I didn't know you could play," but instead Toby says, "You're really good." And she is. It's amazing what you can learn when you have the time. "Thanks," she says, running her fingertips across the keys. Toby is restless now, escaping to the kitchen. "Coffee?" he asks, shuffling through the cupboards. "I found tea." She starts to play a different song. Nothing intricate, just a strain of notes, the beginnings of something. She finds the melody, takes it up, lets it slip between her fingers as Toby ducks back into the room, a steaming cup in his hands. "What was that?" he asks, eyes brightening in that way unique to artists, writers, painters, musicians, anyone prone to moments of inspiration. It sounded familiar. A shrug. "You played it for me last night?" It isn't a lie, not exactly. He did play it for her, after she showed him. "I did," he says, brow furrowing. He's already setting the coffee aside, reaching for a pencil and a notepad off the nearest table. God, I must have been drunk. He shakes his head as he says it. Toby's never been one of those songwriters who prefer to work under the influence. "Do you remember more?" he asks, turning through the pad. She starts playing again, leading him through the notes. He doesn't know it, but he's been working on this song for weeks. Well, they have. Together. She smiles a little as she plays on. This is the grass between the nettles, a safe place to step. She can't leave her own mark, but if she's careful, she can give the mark to someone else. Nothing concrete, of course, but inspiration rarely is. Toby's got the guitar up now, balanced on one knee, and he follows her lead, murmuring to himself. This is good, this is different, this is something. She stops playing, gets to her feet. "I should go." The melody falls apart on the strings as Toby looks up. "What? But I don't even know you." "Exactly," she says, heading for the bedroom to collect her clothes. "But I want to know you," Toby says, setting down the guitar and trailing her through the apartment. And this is the moment when none of it feels fair, the only time she feels the wave of frustration threatening to break, because she has spent weeks getting to know him, and he has spent hours forgetting her. Slow down. She hates this part. She shouldn't have lingered, should have been out of sight as well as out of mind, but there's always that nagging hope that this time it will be different, that this time they will remember. I remember, says the darkness in her ear. She shakes her head, forcing the voice away. Where's the rush? Asks Toby. At least let me make you breakfast. But she's too tired to play the game again so soon, and so she lies instead, says there's something she has to do, and doesn't let herself stop moving because if she does, she knows she won't have the strength to start again, and the cycle will spin on, the affair beginning in the morning instead of at night. But it won't be any easier when it ends, and if she has to start over, she'd rather be a meet-cute at a bar than the unremembered aftermath of a one-night stand. It won't matter in a moment anyways. Just wait, Toby says, catching her hand. He fumbles for the right words, and then gives up, starts again. I have a gig tonight at the Alloway. You should come. It's over on... She knows where it is, of course. That is where they met for the first time, and the 5th, and the 9th. And when she agrees to come, his smile is dazzling. It always is. Promise? He asks. Promise. I'll see you there, he says, the words full of hope as she turns and steps through the door. She looks back and says, Don't forget me in the meantime. An old habit, a superstition, a plea. Toby shakes his head. How could I? She smiles, as if it's just a joke. But Addie knows, as she forces herself down the stairs, that it's already happening. Knows that by the time he closes the door, she'll be gone. 2. March is such a fickle month. It is the seam between winter and spring, though seam suggests an even hem, and March is more like a rough line of stitches sewn by an unsteady hand, swinging wildly between January gusts and June greens. You don't know what you'll find until you step outside. Estelle used to call these the restless days, when the warmer-blooded gods began to stir, and the cold ones began to settle, when dreamers were most prone to bad ideas and wanderers were likely to get lost. Addie has always been predisposed to both. It makes sense, then, that she was born on the 10th of March, right along the ragged seam, though it has been so long since Addie felt like celebrating. For 23 years, she dreaded the marker of time, what it meant, that she was growing up, growing old. And then, for centuries, a birthday was a rather useless thing, far less important than the night she signed away her soul. That date, a death and a rebirth, rolled into one. Still, it is her birthday, and a birthday deserves a gift. She pauses in front of a boutique, her reflection ghosted in the glass. In the broad window, a mannequin poses mid-stride, its head tilted ever so slightly to one side, as if listening to some private song. Its long torso is wrapped in a broad striped sweater, a pair of oil-slick leggings vanishing into knee-high boots. One hand up, fingers hooked in the collar of the jacket that hangs over one shoulder. As Addie studies the mannequin, she finds herself mimicking the pose, shifting her stance, tilting her head. And maybe it's the day or the promise of spring in the air, or maybe she's simply in the mood for something new. Inside, the boutique smells of unlit candles and unworn clothes, and Addie runs her fingers over cotton and silk before finding the striped knit sweater, which turns out to be cashmere. She throws it over one arm, along with the featured leggings. She knows her sizes. They haven't changed. "Hi there." The cheerful clerk is a girl in her early 20s, like Addie herself, though one is real and aging, and the other is an image trapped in amber. "Can I get a room started for you?" "Oh, that's okay," she says, plucking a pair of boots from a display. "I've got everything I need." She follows the girl to the 3 curtained stalls at the rear of the shop. "Just give me a shout if I can help," says the girl, turning away before the curtains swing shut, and Addie is alone with a pillowed bench and a full-length mirror and herself. She kicks off her boots and shrugs out of her jacket, tossing it onto the seat. Change rattles in the pocket as it lands, and something tumbles out. It hits the floor with a dull clack and rolls across the narrow changing room, stopping only when it meets the baseboard. It is a ring. A small circle carved of ash-gray wood, a familiar band, once loved, now loathsome. Addie stares at the thing a moment. Her fingers twitch, traitorous, but she doesn't reach for the ring, doesn't pick it up, just turns her back on the small wooden circle and continues undressing. She pulls on the sweater, shimmies into the leggings, zips up the boots. The mannequin was thinner, taller, but Addie likes the way the outfit hangs on her, the warmth of the cashmere, the weight of the leggings, the soft embrace of the lining in the boots. She plucks the price tags off one by one, ignoring the zeros. Joyeux anniversaire, she thinks, meeting her reflection, inclining her head as if she too hears some private song. The picture of a modern Manhattan woman, even if the face in the mirror is the same one she's had for centuries. Addie leaves her old clothes strewn like a shadow across the dressing room floor, the ring a scorned child in the corner. The only thing she reclaims is the discarded jacket. It's soft, made of black leather, and worn practically to silk, the kind of thing people pay a fortune for these days and call it vintage. It is the only thing Addie refused to leave behind and feed to the flames in New Orleans, though the smell of him clung to it like smoke, his stain forever on everything. She does not care. She loves the jacket. It was new then, but it is broken in now, shows its wear in all the ways she can't. It reminds her of Dorian Gray, time reflected in cowhide instead of human skin. Addie steps out of the little curtained booth. Across the boutique, the clerk startles, flustered at the sight of her. "Everything fit?" she asks, too polite to admit she doesn't remember letting someone into the back. God bless customer service. Addie shakes her head ruefully. "Some days you're stuck with what you've got," she says, heading for the door. By the time the clerk finds the clothes, a ghost of a girl on the changing room floor, she won't remember whose they are, and Addie will be gone, from sight and mind and memory. She tosses the jacket over her shoulder, one finger hooked in the collar, and steps out into the sun. Villons-sur-Sarthe, France. Summer, 1698. 3. Adeline sits on a bench beside her father. Her father, who is to her a mystery, a solemn giant most at home inside his workshop. Beneath their feet, a pile of woodwares makes shapes like small bodies under a blanket, and the cartwheels rattle as Maxime, a sturdy mare, draws them down the lane, away from home. Away. Away. A word that makes her small heart race. Adeline is 7, the same as the number of freckles on her face. She is bright and small and quick as a sparrow, and has begged for months to go with him to market. Begged until her mother swore she would go mad, until her father finally said yes. He is a woodworker, her father, and 3 times a year he makes the trip along the Sarthe up to the city of Le Mans. And today, she is with him. Today, for the first time, Adeline is leaving Villons. She looks back at her mother, arms crossed beside the old yew tree at the end of the lane, and then they round the bend, and her mother is gone. The village rolls past. Here the houses, and there the fields. Here the church, and there the trees. Here Monsieur Berger turning soil, and there Madame Darreau hanging clothes, her daughter Isabelle sitting in the grass nearby, twining flowers into crowns, her tongue between her teeth in concentration. When Adeline told the girl about her trip, Isabelle had only shrugged and said, "I like it here." As if you couldn't like one place and want to see another. Now she looks up at Adeline and waves as the cart goes by. They reach the edge of the village, the farthest she has ever gone before, and the cart hits a divot in the road and shakes as if it too has crossed a threshold. Adeline holds her breath, expecting to feel some rope draw tight inside her, binding her to the town. But there is no tether, no lurch. The cart keeps moving, and Adeline feels a little wild and a little scared as she turns back to look at the shrinking picture of Villon, which was, until now, the sum of her world, and is now only a part, made smaller with the mare's every step, until the town seems like one of her father's figurines, small enough to nest within one calloused palm. It is a day's ride to Le Mans, the trek made easy with her mother's basket and her father's company, one's bread and cheese to fill her belly, and the other's easy laugh and broad shoulders making shade for Adeline beneath the summer sun. At home he is a quiet man, committed to his work, but on the road he begins to open, to unfold, to speak. And when he speaks, it is to tell her stories. Those stories he gathered the way one gathers wood. Il était une fois, he will say, before sliding into stories of palaces and kings, of gold and glamour, of masquerade balls and cities full of splendor. Once upon a time, this is how the story starts. She will not remember the stories themselves, but she will recall the way he tells them. The words feel smooth as river stones, and she wonders if he tells these stories when he is alone, if he carries on, talking to Maxime in this easy, gentle way, wonders if he tells stories to the wood as he is working it, or if they are just for her. Adeline wishes she could write them down. Later, her father will teach her letters. Her mother will have a fit when she finds out, and accuse him of giving her another way to idle, waste the hours of the day. But Adeline will steal away into his workshop nonetheless, and he will let her sit and practice writing her own name in the fine dust that always seems to coat the workshop floor. But today, she can only listen. The countryside rolls past around them, a jostling portrait of a world she already knows. The fields are fields, just like her own, the trees arranged in roughly the same order, and when they do come upon a village, it is a watery reflection of Villon, and Adeline begins to wonder if the world outside is as boring as her own. And then, the walls of Le Mans come into sight. Stone ridges rising in the distance, a many-patterned spine along the hills. It is 100 times the size of Villon, or at least it is that grand in memory, and Adeline holds her breath as they pass through the gates and into the protected city. Beyond, a maze of crowded streets. Her father guides the cart between houses squeezed tight as stones until the narrow road opens onto a square. There is a square back in Villon, of course, but it is little bigger than their yard. This is a giant space, the ground lost beneath so many feet and carts and stalls. And as her father guides Maxime to a stop, Adeline stands on the bench and marvels at the marketplace, the heady smell of bread and sugar on the air, and people everywhere she looks. She has never seen so many of them, let alone ones she does not know. They are a sea of strangers, unfamiliar faces in unfamiliar clothes with unfamiliar voices calling unfamiliar words. It feels as if the doors of her world have been thrown wide, so many rooms added to a house she thought she knew. Her father leans against the cart and talks to anyone who passes by, and all the while his hands move over a block of wood, a small knife nested in one palm. He shaves at the surface with all the steady ease of someone peeling an apple, ribbons falling between his fingers. Adeline has always loved to watch him work, to see the figures take shape, as if they were there all along, but hidden, like pits in the center of a peach. Her father's work is beautiful, the wood smooth where his hands are rough, delicate where he is large. And mixed among the bowls and cups, tucked between the tools of his trade, are toys for sale, and wooden figures as small as rolls of bread, a horse, a boy, a house, a bird. Adeline grew up surrounded by such trinkets, but her favorite is neither animal nor man. It is a ring. She wears it on a leather cord around her neck, a delicate band, the wood ash-gray and smooth as polished stone. He carved it when she was born, made for the girl she'd one day be, and Adeline wears it like a talisman, an amulet, a key. Her hand goes to it now and then, thumb running over the surface the way her mother's runs over a rosary. She clings to it now, an anchor in the storm, as she perches on the back of the cart and watches everything. From this angle, she is almost tall enough to see the buildings beyond. She stretches up onto her toes, wondering how far they go, until a nearby horse jostles their cart as it goes past, and she nearly falls. Her father's hand closes around her arm, pulling her back into the safety of his reach. By the end of the day, the wooden wares are gone, and Adeline's father gives her a copper sol and says she may buy anything she likes. She goes from stall to stall, eyeing the pastries and the cakes, the hats and the dresses and the dolls, but in the end, she settles on a journal, parchment bound with waxy thread. It is the blankness of the paper that excites her, the idea that she might fill the space with anything she likes. She could not afford the pencils to go with it, but her father uses a second coin to buy a bundle of small black sticks and explains that these are charcoal, shows her how to press the darkened chalk to the paper, smudge the line to turn hard edges into shadow. With a few quick strokes, he draws a bird in the corner of the page, and she spends the next hour copying the lines, far more interesting than the letters he's written beneath. Her father packs up the cart as the day gives way to dusk. They will stay the night in a local inn, and for the first time in her life, Adeline will sleep in a foreign bed and wake to foreign sounds and smells, and there will be a moment, as brief as a yawn, when she won't know where she is, and her heart will quicken, first with fear, and then with something else, something she does not have the words for yet. And by the time they return home to Vion, she will already be a different version of herself, a room with the windows all thrown wide, eager to let in the fresh air, the sunlight, the spring. Vion-sur-Sarthe, France, fall 1703. 4. It is a Catholic place, Vion, certainly the part that shows. There is a church in the center of town, a solemn stone thing where everyone goes to save their souls. Adeline's mother and father kneel there twice a week, cross themselves and say their blessings and speak of God. Adeline is 12 now, so she does too. But she prays the way her father turns loaves of bread upright, the way her mother licks her thumb to collect stray flakes of salt, as a matter of habit, more automatic than faith. The church in town isn't new, and neither is God, but Adeline has come to think of him that way, thanks to Estelle, who says the greatest danger in change is letting the new replace the old. Estelle, who belongs to everyone and no one and herself. Estelle, who grew like a tree at the heart of the village by the river, and has certainly never been young, who sprang up from the ground itself with gnarled hands and woody skin and roots deep enough to tap into her own hidden well. Estelle, who believes that the new God is a filigreed thing. She thinks that he belongs to cities and kings, and that he sits over Paris on a golden pillow and has no time for peasants, no place among the wood and stone and river water. Adeline's father thinks Estelle is mad. Her mother says that the woman is bound for hell, and once, when Adeline repeated as much, Estelle laughed her dry-leaf laugh and said there was no such place, only the cool, dark soil and the promise of sleep. "And what of heaven?" asked Adeline. "Heaven is a nice spot in the shade, a broad tree over my bones." At 12, Adeline wonders which god she should pray to now to make her father change his mind. He has loaded up his cart with wares bound for Le Mans, has harnessed Maxime, but for the first time in 6 years, she is not going with him. He has promised to bring her a fresh pad of parchment, new tools with which to sketch, But they both know she would rather go and have no gifts, would rather see the world outside than have another pad to draw on. She is running out of subjects, has memorized the tired lines of the village and all the familiar faces in it. But this year, her mother has decided that it isn't right for her to go to market. It isn't fitting, even though Adeline knows she can still fit on that wooden bench beside her father. Her mother wishes she was more like Isabelle Darreau, sweet and kind and utterly incurious, content to keep her eyes down upon her knitting instead of looking up at clouds, instead of wondering what's around the bend, over the hills. But Adeline does not know how to be like Isabelle. She does not want to be like Isabelle. She wants only to go to Le Mans, and once there, to watch the people and see the art all around and taste the food and discover things she hasn't heard of yet. "Please," she says as her father climbs up into the cart. She should have stowed away among the woodworks, hidden safe beneath the tarp, but now it is too late, and when Adeline reaches for the wheel, her mother catches her by the wrist and pulls her back. "Enough," she says. Her father looks at them and then away. The cart sets out, and when Adeline tries to tear free and run after the cart, her mother's hand flashes out again, this time finding her cheek. Tears spring to her eyes, a vivid blush before the rising bruise, and her mother's voice, when it lands, is a second blow. "You are not a child anymore." And Adeline understands, and still does not understand at all, feels as if she's being punished for simply growing up. She is so angry then that she wants to run away, wants to fling her mother's needlework into the hearth and break every half-made sculpture in her father's shop. Instead, she watches the cart round the bend and vanish between the trees, with one hand clenched around her father's ring. Adeline waits for her mother to let her go and send her on to do her chores. And then she goes to find Estelle. Estelle, who still worships the old gods. Adeline must have been 5 or 6 the first time she saw the woman drop her stone cup into the river. It was a pretty thing, with a pattern pressed like lace into its sides, and the old woman just let it fall, admiring the splash. Her eyes were closed, and her lips were moving, and when Adeline ambushed the old woman, she was already old, has always been old, on the path home, Estelle said she was praying to the gods. "What for?" "Marie's child isn't coming as it should," she said. "I asked the river gods to make things flow smooth. They are good at that." "But why did you give them your cup?" "Because, Addie, the gods are greedy." Addie. A pet name, one her mother scorned as boyish, a name her father favored, but only when they were alone, a name that rang like a bell in her bones, a name that suited her far more than Adeline. Now she finds Estelle in her garden, folded in among the wild vines of squash, the thorny spine of a blackberry bush, bent low as a warping branch. "Addie," the old woman says her name without looking up. It is autumn, and the ground is littered with the stones of fruit that didn't ripen as it should. Addie nudges them with the toe of her shoe. "How do you talk to them?" she asks. "The old gods. Do you call them by name?" Estelle straightens, joints cracking like dry sticks. If she's surprised by the question, it doesn't show. "They have no names." "Is there a spell?" Estelle gives her a pointed look. "Spells are for witches, and witches are too often burned." "Then how do you pray?" "With gifts and praise, and even then the old gods are fickle. They are not bound to answer." "What do you do then?" "You carry on." She chews on the inside of her cheek. "How many gods are there, Estelle?" "As many gods as you have questions," answers the old woman. But there is no scorn in her voice, and Addie knows to wait her out, to hold her breath until she sees the telltale sign of Estelle's softening. It is like waiting at a neighbor's door after you've knocked, when you know they are home. She can hear the steps, the low rasp of the lock, and knows that it will give. Estelle sighs open.
The old gods are everywhere, she says. They swim in the river, and grow in the field and sing in the woods. They are in the sunlight on the wheat, and under the saplings in spring, and in the vines that grow up the side of that stone church. They gather at the edges of the day, at dawn and at dusk.
Adeline's eyes narrow. Will you teach me how to call on them? The old woman sighs, knowing that Adeline LaRue is not only clever, but also stubborn. She begins wading through the garden to the house, and the girl follows, afraid that if Estelle reaches her front door before she answers, she might close it on this conversation. But Estelle looks back, eyes keen in her wrinkled face.
There are rules.
Adeline hates rules, but she knows that sometimes they are necessary.
Like what? You must humble yourself before them. You must offer them a gift, something precious to you, and you must be careful what you ask for.
Adeline considers. Is that all? Estelle's face darkens.
The old gods may be great, but they are neither kind nor merciful. They are fickle, unsteady as moonlight on water, or shadows in a storm. If you insist on calling them, take heed. Be careful what you ask for. Be willing to pay the price.
She leans over Adeline, casting her in shadow.
And no matter how desperate or dire, never pray to the gods that answer after dark.
2 days later, when Adeline's father returns, he comes bearing a fresh pad of parchment and a bundle of black lead pencils bound with string, and the first thing she does is pick the best one and sink it down into the ground behind their garden, and pray that next time her father leaves, she will be with him. But if the gods hear, they do not answer. She never goes to market again. Villons-sur-Sarthe, France, Spring 1707. 5. Blink, and the years fall away like leaves. Adeline is 16 now, and everyone speaks of her as if she is a summer bloom, something to be plucked and propped within a vase, intended only to flower and then to rot. Like Isabel, who dreams of family instead of freedom, and seems content to briefly blossom and then wither. No. Adeline has decided she would rather be a tree, like Estelle. If she must grow roots, she would rather be left to flourish wild instead of pruned, would rather stand alone, allowed to grow beneath the open sky. Better that than firewood, cut down just to burn in someone else's hearth. She hefts the laundry on her hip and crests the rise, making her way down the weedy slope to the river. When she reaches the banks, she turns the basket out, dumping the soiled clothes into the grass, and there, tucked like a secret between the skirts and aprons and undergarments, is the sketchbook. Not the first. She has gathered them year after year, careful to fill every inch of space, to make the most of each blank page. But every one is like a taper burning on a moonless night, always running out too fast. It does not help that she keeps giving bits away. She kicks off her shoes and slumps back against the slope, her skirts pooling beneath her. She runs her fingers through the weedy grass and finds the fraying edge of the paper, one of her favorite drawings, folded into a square and driven down into the bank last week, just after dawn. A token, buried like a seed, or a promise, an offering. Adeline still prays to the new god when she must, but when her parents are not looking, she prays to the old ones too. She can do both, keep one tucked in her cheek like a cherry pit while she whispers to the other. So far, none of them have answered. And yet, Adeline is sure that they are listening. When Georges Caron began to look at her a certain way last spring, she prayed for him to turn his gaze, and he began to notice Isabel instead. Isabel has since become his wife, and is now ripe with her first child, and worn with all the torments that come with it. When Arnaud Tulle made his intentions clear last fall, Adeline prayed that he would find another girl. He did not, but that winter he took ill and died, and Adeline felt terrible for her relief, even as she fed more trinkets to the stream. She has prayed, and someone must have heard, for she is still free. Free from courtship, free from marriage, free from everything except Villon, left alone to grow and dream. Adeline sits back on the slope, the sketch pad balanced on her knees. She pulls the drawstring pouch from her pocket, bits of charcoal and a few worn-down precious pencils rattling like coins on market day. She used to bind a bit of cloth around the stems to keep her fingers clean, until her father fashioned narrow bands of wood around the blackened sticks and showed her how to hold the little knife, how to shave away the edges and trim the casing into points. And now the images are sharper, the edges contoured, the details fine. The pictures bloom like stains across the paper, landscapes of Villon, and everyone in it, too, the lines of her mother's hair and her father's eyes and Estelle's hands, and then there, tucked into the seams and edges of each page, Adeline's secret, her stranger. Every bit of unused space she fills with him, a face drawn so often that the gestures now feel effortless, the lines unfurling on their own. She can conjure him from memory, even though they have never met. He is, after all, only a figment of her mind, a companion crafted first from boredom and then from longing, a dream to keep her company. She doesn't remember when it started, only that one day she cast her gaze about the village and found every prospect wanting. Arnaud's eyes were pleasant, but he had no chin. Jacques was tall, but dull as dirt. Georges was strong, but his hands were rough, his moods rougher still. And so she stole the pieces she found pleasant and assembled someone new, a stranger. It began as a game, but the more Adeline draws him, the stronger the lines, the more confident the press of her charcoal. Black curls, pale eyes, strong jaw, sloping shoulders, and a Cupid's bow mouth. A man she'd never meet, a life she'd never know, a world she could only dream of. When she is restless, she returns to the drawings, tracing over the now familiar lines, and when she cannot sleep, she thinks of him. Not the angle of his cheek or the shade of green she has conjured for his eyes, but his voice, his touch. She lies awake and imagines him beside her, his long fingers tracing absent patterns on her skin. As he does, he tells her stories. Not the kind her father used to tell, of knights and kingdoms, princesses and thieves, not fairy tales and warnings of venturing outside the lines, but stories that feel like truths, renditions of the road, cities that sparkle, of the world beyond Villon. And even though the words she puts in his mouth are surely full of errors and lies, her stranger's conjured voice makes them sound so wonderful, so real. If only you could see it, he says. I would give anything, she answers. One day, he promises. One day I'll show you. You'll see it all. The words ache, even as she thinks them, the game giving way to want, a thing too genuine, too dangerous. And so, even in her imagination, she guides the conversation back to safer roads. Tell me about tigers, Adeline says, having heard of the massive cats from Estelle, who heard of them from the mason, who was part of a caravan that included a woman who claimed to have seen one. Her stranger smiles and gestures with his tapered fingers and tells her of their silken fur, their teeth, their furious roars. On the slope, the laundry forgotten beside her, Adeline turns her wooden ring absently with one hand as she draws with the other, sketching out his eyes, his mouth, the line of his bare shoulders. She breathes life into him with every line, and with every stroke coaxes out another story. Tell me about dancing in Paris. Tell me about sailing across the sea. Tell me everything. There was no danger in it, no reproach, not when she was young. All girls are prone to dreaming. She will grow out of it, her parents say. But instead, Adeline feels herself growing in, holding tighter to the stubborn hope of something more. The world should be getting larger. Instead, she feels it shrinking, tightening like chains around her limbs as the flat lines of her own body begin to curve out against it, and suddenly the charcoal beneath her nails is unbecoming, as is the idea that she would choose her own company over Arnaud's or Georges or any man who might have her. She is at odds with everything. She does not fit, an insult to her sex, a stubborn child in a woman's form, her head bowed and arms wrapped tight around her drawing pad as if it were a door. And when she looks up, her gaze always goes to the edge of town. A dreamer scorns her mother. A dreamer mourns her father. A dreamer warns Estelle. Still, it does not seem such a bad word. Until Adeline wakes up. New York City, March 10th, 2014. 6. There is a rhythm to moving through the world alone. You discover what you can and cannot live without, the simple necessities and small joys that define a life. Not food, not shelter, not the basic things a body needs, those are, for her, a luxury, but the things that keep you sane, that bring you joy, that make life bearable. Addie thinks of her father and his carvings, the way he peeled away the bark, whittled down the wood beneath to find the shapes that lived inside. Michelangelo called it the angel in the marble, though she'd not known that as a child. Her father had called it a secret in the wood. He knew how to reduce a thing, sliver by sliver, piece by piece, until he found its essence. Knew, too, when he'd gone too far. One stroke too many, and the wood went from delicate to brittle in his hands. Addie has had 300 years to practice her father's art, to whittle herself down to a few essential truths, to learn the things she cannot do without. And this is what she's settled on. She can go without food. She will not wither. She can go without heat. The cold will not kill her. But a life without art, without wonder, without beautiful things, she would go mad. She has gone mad. What she needs are stories. Stories are a way to preserve oneself, to be remembered, and to forget. Stories come in so many forms, in charcoal and in song, in paintings, poems, films, and books. Books, she has found, are a way to live 1,000 lives, or to find strength in a very long one. 2 blocks up Flatbush, she sees the familiar green folding table on the sidewalk, covered in paperbacks, and Fred hunched in his rickety chair behind it, red nose buried in M is for malice. The old man explained to her once, back when he was on K is for killer, how he was determined to get through Grafton's entire alphabet series before he dies. She hopes he makes it. He has a nagging cough, and sitting out there in the cold doesn't help, but here he is whenever Addie comes by. Fred doesn't smile or make small talk. What Addie knows of him she has pried out word by word over the last 2 years, the progress slow and halting. She knows he is a widower who lives upstairs, knows the books belong to his wife Candace, knows that when she died he packed up all her books and brought them down to sell, and it's like letting her go in pieces, selling off his grief. Addie knows that he sits down here because he's afraid of dying in his apartment, of not being found, not being missed.
"I keel over out here," he says. "At least someone'll notice."
He is a gruff old man, but Addie likes him, sees the sadness in his anger, the guardedness of grief. Addie suspects he doesn't really want the books to sell. He doesn't price them, hasn't read more than a few, and sometimes his mood is so coarse, his tone so cold, he actually scares the customers away. Still they come, and still they buy, but every time the selection seems to thin, a new box appears, the contents are unpacked to fill the gaps, and in the last few weeks, Addie has once more begun to spot new releases among the old, fresh covers and unbroken spines in with the battered paperbacks. She wonders if he is buying them, or if other people have begun donating to his strange collection. Addie slows now, her fingers dancing over the spines. The selection is always a medley of discordant notes, thrillers, biographies, romance, battered mass markets mostly, interrupted by a few glossy hardcovers. She has stopped to study them 100 times, but today she simply tips the book on the end into her hand, the gesture light and swift as a magician's, a piece of legerdemain. Practice long given way to perfect. Addie tucks the book under her arm and keeps walking. The old man never looks up. New York City, March 10th, 2014. 7. The market sits like a cluster of old wives at the edge of the park. Long thin from winter, the number of white-capped stalls is finally beginning to swell again, drops of color dotting the square where new produce springs up between the root vegetables, meat, and bread, and other staples resistant to the cold. Addie weaves between the people, heading to the little white tent nestled by the front gates of Prospect. Rise and Shine is a coffee and pastry stall run by a pair of sisters that remind Addie of Estelle, if the old woman had been 2 instead of 1, divided along the lines of temper. If she had been kinder, softer, or perhaps if she had simply lived another life, another time. The sisters are here year-round, come snow or sun, a small constant in an ever-changing city. "Hey, sugar," says Mel, all broad shoulders and wild curls and the kind of sweetness that makes strangers feel like family. Addie loves that, the easy warmth, wants to nestle into it like a well-worn sweater. "What can we get for you?" asks Maggie, older, leaner, laugh lines around her eyes belying the idea she rarely smiles. Addie orders a large coffee and 2 muffins, one blueberry and the other chocolate chip, and then hands over a crumpled 10 that she'd found on Toby's coffee table. She could steal something from the market, of course, but she likes this little stand and the 2 women who run it. "Got a dime?" Maggie asks. Addie digs the change from her pocket, coming up with a few quarters, a nickel, and there it is again, warm among the cold metal coins. Her fingers graze the wooden ring, and she clenches her teeth at the feel of it, like a nagging thought impossible to shed. Sifting through the coins, Addie is careful not to touch the wooden band again as she searches her change, resists the urge to fling the ring into the weeds, knows it will not make a difference if she does. It will always find its way back. The darkness whispers in her ear, arms wrapped like a scarf around her throat. "I am always with you." Addie plucks out a dime and pockets the rest. Maggie hands back $4. "Where you from, doll?" asks Mel, noticing the faintest edge of an accent in the corners of Addie's voice, reduced these days to the vanishing end of an S, the slight softening of a T. It has been so long, and yet she cannot seem to let it go. "Here and there," she says, "but I was born in France." "Oh la la," says Mel in her flat Brooklyn drawl. "Here you go, sunshine," says Maggie, passing her a bag of pastries and a tall cup. Addie curls her fingers around the paper, relishing the heat on her cold palms. The coffee is strong and dark, and when she takes a sip, she feels the warmth all the way down, and she is back in Paris again, in Istanbul, in Naples. A mouthful of memories. She starts toward the park gates. "Au revoir," calls Mel, landing hard on every letter, and Addie smiles into the steam. The air is crisp inside the park. The sun is out, fighting for warmth, but the shade still belongs to winter, so Addie follows the light, sinking onto a grassy slope beneath the cloudless sky. She sits the blueberry muffin on top of the paper bag and sips her coffee, examining the book she borrowed from Fred's table. She hadn't bothered to look at what she was taking, but now her heart sinks a little at the sight of the paperback, the cover soft with wear, the title in German. Kinder- und Hausmärchen, it reads, by Brüder Grimm. Grimm's Fairy Tales. Her German is rusty, kept in the back of her mind, in a corner she hasn't used much since the war. Now she dusts it off, knows that beneath the layer of grime she will find the space intact, undisturbed, the boon of memory. She turns through the fragile old pages, eyes tripping over the words. Once upon a time, she loved this kind of story. When she was still a child, and the world was small, and she dreamed of open doors. But Addie knows too well now, knows that these stories are full of foolish humans doing foolish things, warning tales of gods and monsters and greedy mortals who want too much and then fail to understand what they've lost, until the price is paid and it's too late to claim it back. A voice rises like smoke inside her chest. Never pray to the gods who answer after dark. Addie tosses the book aside and slumps back into the grass, closing her eyes as she tries to savor the sun. Villon-sur-Sarthe, France, July 29th, 1714. 8. Adeline had wanted to be a tree. To grow wild and deep, belong to no one but the ground beneath her feet and the sky above, just like Estelle. It would be an unconventional life, and perhaps a little lonely, but at least it would be hers. She would belong to no one but herself. But here's the danger of a place like Villon. Blink, and a year is gone. Blink, and 5 more follow. It is like a gap between stones, this village, just wide enough for things to get lost. The kind of place where time slips and blurs, where a month, a year, a life can go missing, where everyone is born and buried in the same 10-meter plot. Adeline was going to be a tree. But then came Roger and his wife Paulina, grown up together, and then married, and then gone, in the time it took for her to lace up a pair of boots. A hard pregnancy, a ruinous birth, 2 deaths instead of 1 new life. 3 small children left behind where there should have been 4. The earth still fresh over a grave, and Roger looking for another wife, a mother for his children, a second life at the cost of Adeline's one and only. Of course, she said no. Adeline is 3 and 20, already too old to be wed. 3 and 20, a third of a life already buried. 3 and 20, and then gifted like a prize sow to a man she does not love, or want, or even know. She said no, and learned how much the word was worth. Learned that, like Estelle, she had promised herself to the village, and the village had a need. Her mother said it was duty. Her father said it was mercy, though Adeline didn't know for whom. Estelle said nothing, because she knew it wasn't fair, knew this was the risk of being a woman, of giving yourself to a place instead of a person. Adeline was going to be a tree, and instead, people have come brandishing an axe. They have given her away. She lies awake the night before the wedding and thinks of freedom, of fleeing, of stealing away on her father's horse, even as she knows the thought is madness. She feels mad enough to do it. Instead, she prays. She has been praying, of course, since the day of her betrothal, given half her possessions to the river and buried the other half in the field or at the slope of dirt and brush where the village meets the woods, and now she is almost out of time, and out of tokens. She lies there in the dark, twists the old wooden ring on its leather cord, and considers going out and praying again now, in the dead of night. But Adeline remembers Estelle's fearsome warning about the ones who might answer. So instead, she clenches her hands together and prays to her mother's God instead, prays for help, for a miracle, for a way out. And then, in the darkest part of night, she prays for Roger's death. Anything for her escape. She feels guilty at once, sucks it back into her chest like an expelled breath, and waits. Day breaks like an egg yolk, spilling yellow light across the field. Adeline slips out of the house before dawn, having never slept at all. Now she winds her way through the wild grass beyond the vegetable garden, skirts wicking up the dew. She lets herself sink with the weight of them, her favorite drawing pencil clutched in one hand. Adeline does not want to give it up, but she is running out of time and out of tokens. She presses the pencil point down into the damp soil of the field. "Help me," she whispers to the grass, its edges limned with light. "I know you are there. I know you are listening. Please, please." But the grass is only grass, and the wind is only wind, and neither answers, even when she presses her forehead to the ground and sobs. There is nothing wrong with Roger. But there is nothing right either. His skin is waxy, his blonde hair thinning, his voice like a wisp of wind. When his hand lays itself upon her arm, the grip is weak, and when he inclines his head toward hers, his breath is stale. And Adeline? She is a vegetable left too long in the garden, its skin gone stiff, its insides woody, gone to ground by choice, only to be dug up and made into a meal. "I do not want to marry him," she says, fingers tangled in the weedy earth. "Adeline," calls her mother, as if she is one of the livestock gone astray. She drags herself up, empty with anger and grief, and when she goes inside, her mother sees only the dirt caking her hands and orders her daughter to the basin. Adeline scrubs the soil from beneath her nails, bristles biting her fingers as her mother scolds. "What will your husband think?" Husband. A word like a millstone, all weight and no warmth. Her mother tuts. "You will not be so restless once you have children to tend." Adeline thinks again of Isabel, two small boys clinging to her skirts, a third in a basket by the hearth. They used to dream together, but she has aged 10 years in two, it seems. She is always tired, and there are hollows in her face where once her cheeks were red from laughter. "It will be good for you," says her mother, "to be somebody's wife." The day passes like a sentence. The sun falls like a scythe. Adeline can almost hear the whistle of the blade as her mother braids her hair into a crown, weaves flowers in the place of jewels. Her dress is simple and light, but it might as well be made of mail for how it weighs on her. She wants to scream. Instead, she reaches up and grips the wooden ring around her neck as if for balance. "You must take that off before the ceremony," instructs her mother, and Adeline nods, even as her fingers tighten around it. Her father comes in from the barn, dusted with wood shavings and smelling of sap. He coughs, a faint rattle, like loose seeds inside his chest. It has been there for a year, that cough, but he will not let them talk of it. "You are almost ready?" he asks. What a foolish question. Her mother talks about the wedding dinner as if it had already come and gone. Adeline looks out the window at the sinking sun and doesn't listen to the words, but she can hear the light in her mother's voice, the vindication in it. Even in her father's eyes there is a measure of relief. Their daughter tried to carve her own road, but now things are being set right. A wayward life dragged back on course, propelled down its proper path. The house is too warm, the air heavy and still, and Adeline cannot breathe. Finally, the church bell tolls, the same low tone it calls at funerals, and she forces herself to her feet. Her father touches her arm. His face is sorry, but his grip is firm. "You will come to love your husband," he says, but the words are clearly more wish than promise. "You will be a good wife," says her mother, and hers are more command than wish. And then Estelle appears in the doorway, dressed as if she is in mourning. And why shouldn't she be? This woman who taught her of wild dreams and willful gods, who filled Adeline's head with thoughts of freedom, blew on the embers of hope, and let her believe a life could be her own. The light has gone watery and thin behind Estelle's gray head. There is still time, Adeline tells herself, but it is fleeting, faster now with every breath. Time. How often has she heard it described as sand within a glass, steady, constant, but that is a lie, because she can feel it quicken, crashing toward her. Panic beats a drum inside her chest, and outside the path is a single dark line, stretched straight and narrow toward the village square. On the other side, the church stands waiting, pale and stiff as a tombstone, and she knows that if she walks in, she will not come out. Her future will rush by the same as her past, only worse, because there will be no freedom, only a marriage bed and a death bed and perhaps a child bed between, and when she dies it will be as though she never lived. There will be no Paris, no green-eyed lover, no trips on boats to faraway lands, no foreign skies, no life beyond this village, no life at all, unless... Adeline pulls free of her father's grip, drags to a stop on the path. Her mother turns to look at her, as if she might run, which is exactly what she wants to do, but knows she can't. "I made a gift for my husband," says Adeline, mind spinning. "I've left it in the house." Her mother softens, approving. Her father stiffens, suspicious. Estelle's eyes narrow, knowing. "I'll just fetch it," she continues, already turning back. "I'll go with you," says her father, and her heart lurches, and her fingers twitch, but it is Estelle who reaches out to stop him. "Jean," she says in that sly way, "Adeline cannot be your daughter and his wife. She is a woman grown, not a child to be minded." He finds his daughter's eyes and says, "Be quick." Adeline has already taken flight. Back up the path and past the door, into the house and through to the other side, to the open window and the field and the distant line of trees. The woods standing sentinel at the eastern edge of the village, opposite the sun. The woods, already cloaked in shadow, though she knows there is still light, still time. "Adeline!" calls her father, but she doesn't look back. Instead, she climbs through the window, wood snagging on the wedding dress as she stumbles out and runs. "Adeline! Adeline!" The voices call out after her, but they stretch thinner with every step, and soon she is across the field and into the woods, breaking the line of trees as she sinks to her knees in the dense summer dirt. She clutches the wooden ring, feels the loss of it even before she tugs the leather cord over her head. Adeline does not want to sacrifice it, but she has used up all her tokens, given every gift she could spare back to the earth, and none of the gods have answered. Now this is all she has left, and the light is thin, and the village is calling, and she is desperate to escape. "Please," she whispers, her voice breaking over the word as she plunges the band down into the mossy earth. "I will do anything." The trees murmur overhead, and then go still, as if they too are waiting, and Adeline prays to every god in the Vion woods, to anyone and anything who will listen. This cannot be her life. This cannot be all there is. "Answer me," she pleads as the damp seeps into her wedding dress. She squeezes her eyes shut and strains to hear, but the only sound is her own voice on the wind and her name echoing in her ears like a heartbeat. "Adeline! Adeline! Adeline!" She bows her head against the soil and grips the dark earth and screams, "Answer me!" The silence is mocking. She has lived here all her life and never heard the woods this quiet. Cold settles over her, and she doesn't know if it's coming from the forest or from her own bones, giving up the last of their fight. Her eyes are still shut tight, and perhaps that is why she doesn't notice that the sun has slipped behind the village at her back, that dusk has given way to dark. Adeline keeps praying and doesn't notice at all. Vion-sur-Sarthe, France, July 29th, 1714. 9. The sound, when it comes, is a low rumble, deep and distant as thunder. Laughter, Adeline thinks, opening her eyes and noticing, finally, how the light has faded. She looks up, but sees nothing. "Hello?" The laughter draws itself into a voice, somewhere behind her. "You need not kneel," it says. "Let us see you on your feet." She scrambles up and turns, but she is met only by darkness, surrounded by it, a moonless night after the summer sun has fled, and Adeline knows then that she has made a mistake, that this is one of the gods she was warned against. "Adeline! Adeline!" call the voices from the town, as faint and far away as the wind. She squints into the shadows between the trees, but there is no shape, no god to be found, only that voice, close as a breath against her cheek. "Adeline, Adeline," it says, mocking. "They are calling for you." She turns again, finding nothing but deep shadow. "Show yourself," she orders, her own voice sharp and brittle as a stick. Something brushes her shoulder, grazes her wrist, drapes itself around her like a lover. Adeline swallows. "What are you?" The shadow's touch withdraws. "What am I?" it asks, an edge of humor in that velvet tone. "That depends on what you believe." The voice splits, doubles, rattling through tree limbs and sneaking over moss, folding over on itself until it is everywhere. "So tell me, tell me, tell me," it echoes. "Am I the devil, or the dark, dark, dark? Am I a monster, monster, or a god, 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 or—" The shadows in the woods begin to pull together, drawn like storm clouds. But when they settle, the edges are no longer wisps of smoke, but hard lines, the shape of a man, made firm by the light of the village lanterns at his back. "Or am I this?" The voice spills from a perfect pair of lips, a shadow revealing emerald eyes that dance below black brows, black hair that curls across his forehead, framing a face that Adeline knows too well, one that she has conjured up 1,000 times in pencil and charcoal and dream. It is the stranger. Her stranger. She knows it is a trick, a shadow parading as a man, but the sight of him still robs her breath. The darkness looks down at his shape, seeing himself as if for the first time, and seems to approve. "Ah, so the girl believes in something after all." Those green eyes lift. "Well now," he says, "you have called, and I have come." Never pray to the gods that answer after dark. Adeline knows, she knows, but this is the one who answered, the only one who would help. "Are you prepared to pay?" Pay. The price. The ring. Adeline drops to her knees, scours the ground until she finds the leather cord and frees her father's ring from the soil. She holds it out to the god, its pale wood now stained with dirt, and he draws closer. He may look like flesh and blood, but he still moves like shadow. A single step, and he is there, filling her vision, folding one hand around the ring and resting the other on Adeline's cheek. His thumb brushes the freckle beneath her eye, the edge of her stars. "My dear," says the darkness, taking the ring, "I do not deal in trinkets." The wooden band crumbles in his hand and falls away, nothing more than smoke. A strangled sound escapes her lips. It hurt enough to lose the ring, hurts more to see it wiped from the world like a smudge on skin. But if the ring is not enough, then what? "Please," she says, "I would give anything." The shadow's other hand still rests against her cheek. You assume I want anything, he says, lifting her chin. But I take only one coin. He leans closer still, green eyes impossibly bright, his voice soft as silk. The deals I make for souls. Adeline's heart lurches in her chest. In her mind, she sees her mother on her knees in church, speaking of God and heaven, hears her father talking, telling stories of wishes and riddles. She thinks of Estelle, who believes in nothing but a tree over her bones, who would say that a soul is nothing more than a seed returned to soil, though she's the one who warned against the dark. Adeline, says the darkness, her name sliding like moss between his teeth. I am here. Now tell me why. She has waited so long to be met, to be answered, to be asked, that at first the words all fail her. I do not want to marry. She feels so small when she says it. Her whole life feels small, and she sees that judgment reflected in the god's gaze, as if to say, is that all? And no, it is more than that. Of course it is more. I do not want to belong to someone else, she says with sudden vehemence. The words are a door flung wide, and now the rest pour out of her. I do not want to belong to anyone but myself. I want to be free. Free to live and to find my own way, to love or to be alone, but at least it is my choice, and I am so tired of not having choices, so scared of the years rushing past beneath my feet. I do not want to die as I've lived, which is no life at all. The shadow cuts her off, impatient. What use is it to tell me what you do not want? His hand slides through her hair, comes to rest against the back of her neck, drawing her close. Tell me instead what you want most. She looks up. I want a chance to live. I want to be free. She thinks of the years slipping by. Blink and half your life is gone. I want more time. He considers her, those green eyes changing shade, now spring grass, now summer leaf. How long? Her mind spins. 50 years, 100, every number feels too small. Ah, says the darkness, reading her silence. You do not know. Again the green eyes shift, darken. You ask for time without limit. You want freedom without rule. You want to be untethered. You want to live exactly as you please. Yes, says Adeline, breathless with want, but the shadow's expression sours. His hand drops from her skin, and then he is no longer there, but leaning against a tree several strides away. I decline, he says. Adeline draws back as if struck. What? She has come this far, has given everything she has. She made her choice. She cannot go back to that world, that life, that present and past without a future. You cannot decline. One dark brow lifts, but there is no amusement in that face. I am not some genie bound to your whim. He pushes off the tree. Nor am I some petty forest spirit, content with granting favors for mortal trinkets. I am stronger than your god and older than your devil. I am the darkness between stars and the roots beneath the earth. I am promise and potential, and when it comes to playing games, I divine the rules, I set the pieces, and I choose when to play. And tonight, I say no. Adeline? Adeline? Adeline! Beyond the edge of the woods, the village lights are closer now. There are torches in the field. They are coming for her. The shadow looks over his shoulder. Go home, Adeline. Back to your small life. Why? She pleads, grabbing his arm. Why do you refuse me? He brushes his hand along her cheek, the gesture soft and warm as hearth smoke. I am not in the business of charity. You ask for too much. How many years until you're sated? How many until I get my due? No, I make deals with endings, and yours has none. She will come back to this moment 1,000 times. In frustration and regret, in sorrow and self-pity and unbridled rage. She will come to face the fact that she cursed herself before he ever did. But here and now, all she can see is the flickering torchlight of Villon and the green eyes of the stranger she once dreamed of loving, and the chance to escape slipping away with his touch. "You want an ending?" she says. "Then take my life when I am done with it. You can have my soul when I don't want it anymore." The shadow tips his head, suddenly intrigued. A smile, just like the smile in her drawings, askance and full of secrets, crosses his mouth. And then he pulls her to him, a lover's embrace. He is smoke and skin, air and bone, and when his mouth presses against hers, the first thing she tastes is the turning of the seasons, the moment when dusk gives way to night. And then his kiss deepens. His teeth skim her bottom lip, and there is pain in the pleasure, followed by the copper taste of blood on her tongue. "Done," whispers the god against her lips. And then the world goes black, and she is falling. Villon-sur-Sarthe, France, July 29th, 1714. 10. Adeline shivers. She looks down and sees that she is sitting on a bed of wet leaves. A second ago she was falling, but only for a second, barely the length it takes to draw a breath, but time, it seems, has skipped ahead. The stranger is gone, and so are the last dregs of light. The summer sky, where it shows through the canopied trees, is smoothed to a velvet black, marked only by a low-hanging moon. Adeline rises, studying her hands, looking past the dirt for some sign of transformation. But she feels unchanged. A little dizzy, perhaps, as if she stood too quickly or drunk too much wine on an empty stomach, but after a moment even that unsteadiness has passed, and she's left feeling as if the world has tipped, but not fallen, leaned and then rebalanced, settled back into the same old groove. She licks her lips, expecting to taste blood, but the mark left by the stranger's teeth is gone, swept away with every other trace of him. How does one know if a spell has worked? She asked for time, for life. Will she have to wait a year, or 3, or 5, to see if age leaves any mark? Or take up a knife and cut into her skin to see if and how it heals? But no. She had asked for life, not a life unscathed, and if Adeline is being honest, she is afraid to test it, afraid to find her skin still too yielding, afraid to learn that the shadow's promise was a dream, or worse, a lie. But she knows one thing. Whether or not the deal was real, she will not heed the ringing church bells, will not marry Roger. She will defy her family. She will leave Villon if she must. She knows she will do whatever it takes now, because she was willing in the dark, and one way or another from this moment forward, her life will be her own. The thought is thrilling, terrifying, but thrilling as she leaves the forest. She is halfway across the field before she realizes how quiet the village is, how dark. The festive lanterns have been put out, the bells have stopped ringing. There are no voices calling her name. Adeline makes her way home, the dull dread growing a little sharper with every step. By the time she gets there, her mind is buzzing with worry. The front door hangs open, spilling light onto the path, and she can hear her mother humming in the kitchen, her father chopping wood around the side of the house. A normal night, made wrong by the fact it was not meant to be a normal night. "Maman?" she says, stepping inside. A plate shatters to the floor, and her mother yelps, not in pain but surprise, her face contorted. "What are you doing here?" she demands, and here is the anger Addie expected. Here is the dismay. "I'm sorry," she starts. "I know you must be mad, but I couldn't. Who are you?" The words are a hiss, and she realizes then that fearsome look on her mother's face is not the anger of a mother scorned, but that of a woman scared. "Maman," her mother cringes away from the very word. "Get out of my house!" But Adeline crosses the room, grabs her by the shoulders. "Don't be absurd! It's me, She is about to say Adeline. Indeed, she tries. 3 syllables should not be such a mountain to climb, but she is breathless by the end of the first, unable to manage the second. The air turns to stone inside her throat, and she is left stifled, silent. She tries again, this time attempting Addie. Then at last their family name, LaRue. But it is no use. The words meet an impasse between her mind and tongue, and yet the second she draws breath to say another word, any other word, it is there, lungs filled and throat loose. "Let go!" pleads her mother.
"What's this?"
demands a voice, low and deep. The voice that soothed Adeline on sick nights, that told her stories as she sat on the floor of his shop. Her father stands in the doorway, his arms full of wood. "Papa!" she says, and he draws back, as if the word were sharp. "The woman is mad!" sobs her mother. "Or cursed! I am your daughter," she says again. Her father grimaces.
"We have no child."
Those words, a duller knife, a deeper cut. "No," says Adeline, shaking her head at the absurdity. She is 23, has lived every day and every night beneath this roof. "You know me." How can they not? The resemblance between them has always been so keen. Her father's eyes, her mother's chin, one's brow and the other's lips, each piece clearly copied from its source. They see it too, they must. But to them, it is only proof of devilry. Her mother crosses herself, and her father's hands close around her, and she wants to sink into the strength of his embrace, but there is not warmth in it as he drags her to the door. "No," she begs. Her mother is crying now, one hand to her mouth and the other clutching the wooden cross around her neck, as she calls her own daughter a demon, a monster, a demented thing, and her father says nothing, only grips her arm tighter as he pulls her from the house. "Begone," he says, the words half pleading. Sadness sweeps across his face, but not the kind that comes with knowing. No, it is the sadness reserved for lost things, a storm-torn tree, a horse made lame, a carving split one stroke before it's done. "Please," she begs. "Papa!" His face hardens as he forces her out into the dark and slams the door. The bolt scrapes home. Adeline stumbles back, shaking with shock and horror. And then she turns and runs. "Estelle." The name begins as a prayer, soft and private, and grows to a shout as Adeline nears the woman's cottage. "Estelle!" A lamp is lit within, and by the time she reaches the edge of the light, the old woman stands in the open doorway, waiting for her caller.
"Are you a stranger or a spirit?"
Estelle asks warily. "I am neither," says Adeline, though she knows how she must look. Her dress tattered, her hair wild, streaming words like witchcraft on the step. "I am flesh and blood and human, and I have known you all my life. You make charms in the shape of children to keep them well in winter. You think peaches are the sweetest fruit, and that church walls are too thick for prayers to get through, and you want to be buried not beneath a stone, but in a patch of shade under a large tree." Something flashes across the old woman's face, and Adeline holds her breath, hoping it is recognition, but it is too brief.
"You are a clever spirit," says Estelle, "but you will not cross this hearth."
"I am not a spirit!" shouts Adeline, storming into the light of the old woman's door. You taught me about the old gods and all the ways to summon them, but I made a mistake. They wouldn't answer, and the sun was going down so fast. She wraps her arms tight around her ribs, unable to stop shaking. I prayed too late, and something answered, and now everything is wrong.
Foolish girl,
chides Estelle, sounding like herself, sounding as if she knows her. What do I do? How do I fix it? But the old woman only shakes her head.
The darkness plays its own game, she says. It makes its own rules, she says. And you have lost.
And with that, Estelle draws back into her house. Wait! Calls Adeline as the old woman shuts the door. The bolt drives home. Adeline hurls herself against the wood, sobbing until her legs give way and she sinks to her knees on the cold stone step, one fist still pounding against the wood. And then, suddenly, the bolt draws back. The door swings open and Estelle stands over her.
What is this?
She asks, surveying the girl folded on her steps. The old woman looks at her as if they've never met, the moments before erased by an instant and a closed door. Her wrinkled gaze flicks over the stained wedding dress, the wild hair, the dirt under her nails, but there's no knowing in her face, only a guarded curiosity.
Are you a spirit or a stranger?
Adeline squeezes her eyes shut. What is happening? Her name is still a rock lodge deep, and when she was a spirit, she was banished, so she swallows hard and answers, "A stranger." Tears begin to slide down Adeline's face. "Please," she manages. "I have nowhere to go." The old woman looks at her for a long moment, and then nods.
"Wait here,"
she says, slipping back into the house, and Adeline will never know what Estelle was going to do then, because the door swings shut and stays shut, and she is left kneeling on the ground, trembling more from shock than cold. She doesn't know how long she sits there, but her legs are stiff when she forces them to bear her weight. She rises and walks past the old woman's house to the line of trees beyond, past their sentinel's edge into the crowded dark. "Show yourself!" she calls out. But there is only the ruffle of feathers, the crackle of leaves, the ripple of a forest disturbed in sleep. She conjures his face, those green eyes, those black curls, tries to will the darkness into shape again, but moments pass and she is still alone. I do not want to belong to anyone. Adeline walks deeper into the forest. This is a wilder stretch of wood, the floor a nest of bramble and brush. It claws at her bare legs, but she doesn't stop, not until the trees have closed around her, their branches blotting out the moon overhead. "I call on you!" she screams. I am not some genie bound to your whim. A low limb, half buried by the forest floor, rises just enough to catch her feet, and she goes down hard, knees hitting ragged earth and hands tearing through weedy soil. Please, I will give anything. The tears come then, sudden and heaving. Fool, fool, fool. She pounds her fists against the ground. This is a vile trick, she thinks, a horrid dream. But it will pass. That is the nature of dreams. They do not last. Wake up, she whispers into the dark. Wake up. Adeline curls into the forest floor, closes her eyes, and sees her mother's tear-stained cheeks, her father's hollow sadness, Estelle's weary gaze. She sees the darkness, smiling. Hears his voice as he whispers that single, binding word. Done.